Hi, good morning everyone and welcome to our remote meeting of the Area Planning Committee North. Please excuse me if you see me glancing to one side, but I have my papers up on another computer, therefore I mightn't always be looking straight at the screen. I'm Councillor Ivan Jewell and I'm chair of this committee. Please note that this meeting is being streamed live to the council website and will be available for viewing for a minimum of 6 months. I'd like to give a warm welcome to members, officers and any member of the public or media who are watching this live stream of the meeting. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to members of the public who have registered to speak for this meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow in order that the meeting runs as efficiently as possible. Please do bear with us as this method is relatively new to us. For the participants of the meeting, could I ask you only to speak when invited to do so by myself? Keep your microphone on mute at all times unless invited to speak. To committee members, if you wish to speak, please type RTS in the chat function, and that will indicate to me that you wish to speak. Please don't use the hands up function because what that doesn't do is tell me the order in which people have requested. So I would request that you use the request to speak, please. Once invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name and position, unless you have already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. If I lose connection, Councillor John Robertson will take over in my absence and until my connection can be restored. So that is the housekeeping rules out of the way now. Can I maybe start by having officers introduce themselves, please? And can I start off by planning officers, please?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Friends. I'm the Senior Planning Officer for the Northern Area Planning team.
Good morning, I'm Fiona Clark, Principal Planning Officer for the Northern Area team.
And could I ask committee services, please?
Thanks, Chair. Michael Turnbull, Senior Committee Services Officer.
Good morning, Chair. Lucy Gladders, Committee Services Officer.
Thank you. And could I ask our legal officer, please?
Morning, everyone. Neil Carter. I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Thanks very much. And I believe we also have some officers speaking, I think, maybe Dave, in terms of transport issues.
Good morning. I'm Principal Highways Engineer David Smith.
Thanks very much, David. And I believe that we have some from Environmental. Is that correct?
Morning, Chair. Yes, I'm Mark Anslow from Environmental Health.
That's fine. Thanks very much for that. OK, can we make a start now? And can I start with any apologies for absence, please?
Chair, we've had apologies this morning from Councillor Simon Wilson.
Thanks very much. And do we have any substitute members?
Chair, there's no substitute members this morning.
Thank you for that. Can I now move to the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on the 16th of June 2020, which are pages 3 to 20 in your pack. I am assuming that you committee members have all read them. Can I ask for someone to move and second those minutes, please?
Councillor Boyes, move the minutes, Chair.
Councillor Bainbridge, I'll second those minutes, Chair.
Thank you, councillors, for that.
Chair, Councillor Shield wishes to raise a point on the minutes.
OK, thanks very much.
Chair, could I, I'm unmuted. Can I refer to the minutes of the application DM 20-00219, which was the St Ebba's Way, 7 St Ebba's Way? Can I just confirm basically that it was agreed by a proposal put forward, a motion put forward by Councillor Boyes, that there were additional conditions to be determined by the chair, vice chair and local members and legal. And my understanding was that all plan works would be completed collectively. I need to advise you that my understanding was that would include the work on the dropped curbs and not just the work on the driveway and the highway. I have to tell you that as of yesterday, when I went to visit, the drop curb work has not been done. I have previously chased this up with highways, and they have stated, and I read verbatim, that the applicant has paid for his vehicle crossing licence on the 2nd of October, but the licence is live for 5 years. And it is up to the contractor or the applicant to push the contractor to get it done. So this application was approved and the 3-month criteria ended on the 19th of September. So here we are 2 months later, no completion of the condition, and yet there are no enforcement proceedings going ahead. I also like to get a clarity on the voting aspect of that application, Chair, because if I'm minded correctly, you used your casting vote because the roll call showed that it was an equal split of 5 votes for the application and 5 votes against the application. That is not reflected in the minutes. It clearly states that it was approved following a roll call. I think for validity and accuracy of information, that information to say that you use your casting vote needs to be included. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I have no problems. Neil, would you like to come in on any of these aspects of this, please, from a legal perspective?
Chair, I've got no problem with what Councillor Shields said in terms of sort of general amendments to the minutes to add in further detail. I'm not fully appraised of the situation in terms of enforcement, so I'd probably have to hand over to planning officers to give any sort of update on that, I'm afraid.
Thanks very much for that, Neil. Do our planners want to make any comment on what Councillor Shield has introduced, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, I would. It was just to clarify the point with regard to the dropped curb that Councillor Shield has raised. With regard to that, the dropped curb is outside of the red line of the application site within the public highway. Therefore, we can't put a condition on relating to land which isn't within the application site. It is regrettable that that work hasn't been carried out and the enforcement officer is in contact with the applicant, but we haven't got any legal powers to require that work to be done within the 3-month period, being as though it is outside the red line of the application site, Chair.
So the reality is that this would have to be handled outside of this planning process. Am I correct?
That's correct, yes, Chair.
That's fair enough. Well, thanks very much, Councillor Shield, for what you brought to the meeting. I am quite happy that sort of the aspects which can be changed are changed. And I think that what you'd have to do is you'd have to progress the other item, the drop curb item, via a different channel. Are you OK with that, Councillor Shield?
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. Thank you. OK, let's see where we are now. Yeah, we have. Is everyone in favour of the minutes as with amended as suggested?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
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 Thanks very much for that. Anyone that doesn't agree, maybe if you type in the box, request to speak. I'm not getting any requests to speak there, so I take it as those minutes are passed with the amendments which have been made. Thanks very much. Can I ask, are there any declaration of interest, please? No declaration of interest. Thanks very much. And so can we now move on to the applications to be determined by the Area Plan Committee North this morning. And the first one is for application DM 2000956 FPA, land to the west of Southfields Farm, Hamsley Mill, and it is pages 21 to 36 of your pack. Can I ask the planning officer to give his presentation? And it's over to you, Steve. Thanks very much.
Chair, before Steve commences, I didn't press my RTS button. I need to advise that I have a personal interest in this item as I am one of the local members, and I need to do that before the officer gives his report.
Thanks very much, Councillor Shields. So you have no prejudicial interest in this?
Can you see the presentation, Chair?
I can see the presentation. Thanks very much.
Sorry, it's coming up with the wrong one again. Let me.
Yes, it is. It's the second one again.
That's. Sorry, bear with me. I shall. Stop presenting. Apologies for this, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. This is my first time on this, and I've had some problems overnight.
Don't panic, Steve. Just try and relax, and I'm sure we'll get there in the end.
It's okay. I'm dressed up as a Channel 4 newsreader just to distract you while this goes on. Just in the meantime, there is a slight error at the beginning of the report, which does state that Councillor Shield called the application to committee. It's actually Councillor Watt-Stelling who called that, allowing Councillor Shield to take part in the meeting. Let me try again, if I may.
Thanks very much.
I'm afraid it's going to come up again with West Pelton. Could I, we do have a backup, could I perhaps ask Fiona to share the presentation from her system? There's I'm not getting past this glitch, I'm afraid.
No pressure, Fiona.
It should be opening up now. Can members see the screen there?
That's it. Thanks very much, Fiona.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Fiona. If we could look at the first slide, shows the location of the unit. Can I see if I can take the Y-shaped red object in the middle of the map? There is the proposed facility, which is basically 3 long chicken sheds which join together in the middle. It's how they work in a sort of conveyor belt system, and you can see it's an open countryside to the left of the map, and will be more visible in the aerial picture I'll show you next. Is the village of Medhamsley, and next to that is a greenfield burial site, which is also a feature of the application and the representations received. To the north is the main road, which drops down from Medhamsley. You can see the steep contours. It goes down as it twists down Longclose Bank towards Hamsley Mill, and at the top of the screen, that's bisected, you can see, by the green dashes of a public footpath. Now, that public footpath is effectively the entrance at the moment to Southfield Farm, and you can see from the red dashes, which are which connect to that footpath, that's the proposed highway access into the site. So the highways are proposed to use an existing access off the main public highway, and then climb up the hill towards where the facility is. You can see it is open countryside. There's woodland around. The village to the east has a conservation area as a large part of it, and some of the areas of woodland, including the little spur of Northwood, I think, is ancient woodland as well. The countryside is designated as an area of high landscape value. Could we have a look at the next slide, please, Fiona? Or am I on it? Oh, I've got it. Slightly wider view, you can again see the relationship to the village to the west. Just to the east of this, on this wider view, you can see an existing chicken shed at Southfield Farm, and the farm group itself immediately to the east of this. The greenfield burial site is just to the left of that brown field at the to the west, to the left of the proposed site. The landform falls effectively fairly gently, more or less, to the greenfield burial site, and then falls steeply after that. And as you can see, Long Close Bank and the road is twisting away there. But clearly, there's sites into countryside, and the relationship to the settlement there you can see quite clearly. This is an agricultural village on an agricultural development. On the right, you can see the Y-shaped form again, and on the left, the elevations, such as they are of the proposed building. The building is about 5.7 metres to the ridgeline, 3.5 metres to the eaves, and you can see the gable ends there. Because it is on sloping ground, although a little bit of a shelf, the left-hand side of it is cut into the slope. The right-hand side slightly built up to try and even it out, and also to help assimilate it into the landscape. To very briefly go through the main points of the report you've got in front of you. There's no objection from the County Highways Officer. An alternate entrance had been directly connected to the main road proposed in the first instance, and that's been moved. And moving to use the existing access to the farm with its existing site traffic has overcome the highways objection. The Coal Authority had suggested a condition following the submission of additional information during the course of the application. There are effectively three main strands to the application. Highways is one, and the landscape and then the environmental health issues are the other. There has been some extensive work done on the landscape effect, and additional landscape visual impact assessments prepared submitted during the course of the application. The last of these has effectively satisfied that an appropriate approach can be developed by the landscape officer, acknowledging this is not just in countryside but in protected countryside as the area of high landscape value. And landscape officers suggest a condition to ensure their requirements, which effectively consist of overlapping requirements with ecology for wildflower meadows and planting, and that planting to reflect the older hedge lines and to disrupt views, particularly from Long Close Bank, meet their requirements and make this, in their view, policy compliant. The main problem for local residents is obviously the potential for this to intrude in terms of the odour implications and the noise implications. And the report you've got in front of you is slightly unusual in that usually there's a summary of the Environmental Health Officer's comments, and then that's examined in detail in the report. In this instance, to give you the Environmental Health Officer's comments in the first voice and uninterrupted, they've been pasted in there, so that's the larger part of the report. And effectively, the distance to the existing receptors, both in terms of the most sensitive receptors, those being the residential ones, and the medium sensitive receptors of the reasonable amenity that can be accepted in the Greenfield burial site, has been considered in detail. The Environmental Health Officer hasn't just assessed the report, but has brought their specialist knowledge in dealing with these elsewhere. And there are similar facilities, and I think it's critical to say at this point, modern chicken and egg facilities, both in the immediate area, that are potentially comparable to this, and on occasion, the latest one down at Hamsley Mill, considerably nearer to residential properties. The old type of implications for these facilities with hens kept inside and large manure piles have moved on to a degree by modern buildings, modern extraction, and the sorts of modern operations that are undertaken these days, both for the residential implications, the effect on the countryside, and as importantly for animal well-being as well, with the end user in mind for this. There are very specific requirements on animal welfare, what constitutes organic, what constitutes open range, and they have to sign up to RSPCA standards. Therefore, the level of odour is dependent on the nature of the operations and the type of building, and these modern purpose-built units have a much reduced impact, along with the good practices that are proposed there. But my colleague from Environmental Health will be able to answer any questions on that in detail, and I'm sure the applicants as well who are here for you today. The assessment demonstrates that the general wind direction which is westerly in this part, and the separation distances and the nature of the odour is negligible for the effect on the dwellings, and at worst a slight adverse effect on the burial ground. That's at its height when the buildings are cleared out, and that happens less than once a year. In terms of noise, a worst case scenario has been assumed for the potential noise impact, and a condition to set particularly the extractors on the building and any noise implications of this is suggested as part of your report. The other aspect of environmental health is contamination. In terms of the actual build for the building itself, they have no adverse comments and no requirements for condition. It's noted that some, or I note that some objections refer to a potential for avian flu from leaching from the graveyard, affecting the hens and getting into the food chain. Whilst there's not been anything in detail submitted to back that up, the contaminated land officers suggest an informative in case there is any unexpected contamination found on site. The ecology requirements effectively overlap with landscape and accommodated by the landscaping scheme. And the reinstatement of some of the older hedgerows gives a benefit of ecological connectivity, wildlife liking to run along screened areas, and the scheme, both in terms of what's proposed for that and the wildflower areas, the wildflower planting, and the open range nature of this itself for the birds meets their requirements. Like I mentioned earlier, for footpaths, the part of the site affects an existing public right of way, the shared access to the farm already, but the level of traffic proposed is such that the footpaths officers are happy with this effect. There is, the reference to the impact assessment. Grab the screen. There should have been on there, I don't know if I missed it, a reference to a coal mining. The coal authority have asked for a condition as well, just to make sure their land stability issues are properly. In principle then, this is an agricultural operation in the countryside, bringing economic activity, both during its construction period and its operation. In terms of the landscape, as I've mentioned, the response of the evolved response in respect of the additional information means that for the effect on the area of high landscape value, suggested landscape condition brings policy compliance and benefits to the surroundings here. The effect on the landscape, whether viewed from distant settlements such as the bank at Dipton in Longviews, it'll be visible in the landscape, albeit these sort of operations are a feature of the landscape in this area, are also in its shortest view from Longclose Bank are considered acceptable. The technical reports for noise and odour have been assessed against the requirements of Policy 31 for amenity and pollution, and conclude on the basis of the detailed operation and the types of buildings that these are acceptable. And likewise, whilst there will be a slight effect on the Greenfield burial site, the nature of this is such that, again, that is concluded acceptable in the level and frequency that is likely to occur. I've touched on highways already, and note again that the use of that access also serves the existing egg production building there, so it's a matter of degree rather than introducing something new onto the public highway there. And for other issues, one of the correspondents mentioned the potential for keeping the development as it was away from heritage assets. That was the one letter of support. There is no effect on the setting of the conservation area nor the listed buildings to the west of the site here. Ground stability can be ensured by a condition suggested by the Coal Authority, and cross-contamination is not evidenced but is covered by the informative for unexpected groundworks. The effect is acceptable on public right-of-ways, as I've already covered. My conclusions, supporting my recommendation for approval, is that this is agricultural development in a countryside setting. It brings economic development. The effects on the countryside, which is designated, can be mitigated. Reasonable expectations of a residential amenity and for the use of the Greenfield burial site can be met. This is acceptable in highway safety terms, and no other issues have been presented that would preclude approval. Thank you for that. If you could undo the presentation, please, Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that presentation. Could I just ask members, do they require any clarification on any points in that in the presentation? Remember that we're not putting it open to discussion here. It was just for clarification on any points made. Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just for clarification on the external area around the agricultural buildings. Are they outside, like the wooded area? Sorry, because obviously a site visit would have like cleared all this up, but unfortunately with not having a site visit, I'm just asking the question. The externally, are the birds outside? Are they housed inside all of the time?
The applicants who are going to speak will be able to give you more detail on this, but effectively this is free range. The area at the moment is open fields with some surrounding woodlands. As part of this, there will be an amount of tree planting to give the birds shelter in the fields, but effectively these are for free range chickens for egg laying, and they're not going to be sort of locked up and enclosed in the building. The idea is they can range. I believe the end user, a specific supermarket, I probably can't mention, seeing as we're broadcasting here, does have very specific requirements about how much external area is available for the birds and how much planting there is for shelter. So they are free range, yes.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Steve. And Fiona, I believe that you want to come in here.
Yes, Chair, if I could just briefly come in there. Unfortunately, there was a slight glitch on the presentation just then, and we skipped through the slide referring to the objections made. So I wonder if I could just go back into the presentation and we can go back to that slide and Steve will just take you through the objections.
Yes, not a problem. Thanks very much.
I'll just skip through to the relevant slide, Chair, just a moment.
Apologies for that, councillors. I thought that was short for me, and wholly unintentional. I'm afraid I am having some difficulties with this. The public consultation exercise. There were 100 letters sent out, both to the edges of the immediate settlement of Medhamsley, to surrounding isolated dwellings and farmhouses, and also to the edge of Dipton, where the site can be visible in longer views. I think it's fair to mention that the extent of this exercise didn't satisfy the village, and there were calls for the whole of the village to be consulted. And I believe that there was some correspondence within the village about this. But the consultation exercise was 100 letters. There were 27 responses with a couple of duplicates in them and 25 objections to it. The main objections are, in the first place, on the visual effect on the countryside and the landscape, both from the village and particularly from Long Close Bank, where there's a contention that the appearance of the building in the landscape is a highway safety issue. It'll distract drivers. The access track is an unacceptable intrusion into its own right into the landscape. And the buildings and the extraction units as agricultural sheds, they are what they are. They're cut in slightly, but they are chicken sheds. Will be a detriment, particularly to walkers and walkers with children in particular, and will further compromise wildlife interests in the area. I think it's fair to say that the main areas of concern are those for residential amenity, and those are significant both in terms of the odour effects and the noise effects. Have contended as affecting residents' right to enjoy their homes and property, both inside their houses and their gardens. Comparable amenity objections have been received from and on behalf of the Greenfield burial site and people's ability to spend time in the area where their loved ones are, and also in a commercial aspect for the Greenfield burial site to effectively sell itself as an appropriate place for future burials. Other objections mention the potential for cross-contamination for leaching from the burial site into the area used by the chicken, and the potential for avian flu at the edge of that. It's contended that, as I mentioned earlier, the sheds in this part of the county are a little bit of a feature in the landscape, spread across the landscape, and it's contended that there's existing and sufficient egg production capacity here, and that alternative sightings are available elsewhere, away from the village, and further away from houses. Like I mentioned, there's criticism of the consultation exercise. The single letter of support submitted to a planning consultant, like I say, notes that the siting does manage to respect the surrounding heritage assets of the listed buildings, Hampstead Hall and the Medhamsley Conservation Area. In putting this by itself rather than near existing facilities, it avoids clustering of these types of buildings and uses, and it acknowledges there are benefits for the rural economy. Apologies for missing that first time round, Chair, ladies and gentlemen. That's the slide. If you could, Fiona, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Steve. Can I just sort of clarify that we did conform with what is required in terms of consultation, please? There seems to be some concern that the residents of Medhamsley felt that the whole of the village should be made aware of it, but that didn't happen, and I would imagine that it doesn't have to happen. Could you just clarify that, Steve, please?
The consultation exercise is always the judgment, and it's those properties affected. Some of the consultees were aggrieved that people in Dipton had been consulted when they hadn't. And it's effectively the edge of the village is 600 to 700 metres away, and those properties that were closest to it were consulted. There is always, particularly in a community, a close-knit community such as Hampstead, discussion about this. Planning officers have a balance between having to do a consultation exercise that is proportionate to the proposals and ensure those directly affected are consulted, and not looking as if we're over consulting and could result in accusations of trying to build opposition to a scheme. So there is a judgment on that, and we discussed it in-house between that and the site notices that were put on the public footpath. I'm confident that the consultation exercise met the council's requirements and was fit for purpose.
Thanks very much for that, Steve. Thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions for clarification, can we move on now, please? And I'd like to call upon Councillor Watts-Stelling, who is a local member who wishes to address the committee. Not wishing to sort of put any limit on you, Watt, but if you can be as concise as possible, that would be useful for the meeting. Thanks very much. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. You can hear us, Chairman?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Chairman, members, for allowing me to speak on this application. Having said that, I will be quick, as the next speaker, a resident of Medhamsley, and I may believe that she might be speaking on behalf of the village association. Back to the presentation, Steve. I didn't see, or was it in bad? I didn't see a red line for the whole of the application site. I just seen the red T for the buildings, but not for the rest of the site. So was the red line not put on, or was it that I couldn't see it?
I'll just unmute. The physical buildings themselves are the development, and the red dashes down for the access to the connection to the existing road, to the existing roadway. The extent of works around the site is within what's called the blue line of the applicant's land ownership, and that is the immediate land around the building, which will be for the use of the chickens and the planted around that, and then extended land around that for the wildflower planting and the ecology works. So effectively, the red line, which is was the development works, which was the building and the roadway, and then the blue line encompasses the wider area within which the extent of the grazing area for the chickens, and then the extended area for the wildlife planting will be in there.
Yeah, so I was just curious that members could see the size of this site. Okay, I'll continue, Chairman. My reasons why I wish members to refuse this application are not in any particular order, and like you said, I don't want members to hear and repeat the reasons, so I'll be extremely quick. Landscape value. This area is an area of high landscape value, and it won't be if this is passed. Pollution of watercourses. This application site is located on the side of a hill along Culloss Bank, known locally as Medhamsley Bank. With water flowing down the road is a major problem throughout the year, and the water seepage from the graveyard 35 metres away and the poultry area down this gradient will not help the pollution of watercourses and natural springs in the area. Nearby there is a really nice public walk mentioned in the report. In this area of high landscape value, the last thing you want when you're on this magnificent walk overlooking to the east the valley of ancient woodlands is smell and noise from the site. I'm afraid this walk will for most be a no-goer. This application will change the whole aspect of this valley and ancient woodlands due to the reasons just mentioned. It will no longer to most be an area of high landscape value. The smell and noise will not only spoil the walk in this area, but being less than 400 metres from the village of Medhamsley, and note that the school is pretty near there as well, the primary school, it'll be a problem for this village. Can I also note that the first poultry site on Southfield Farm is quite near to the farmhouse? Is there enough space, Chairman, for them to accommodate this application? Members, I therefore ask you to refuse this application. Thank you, Chairman, for the time. Members.
Thank you, Councillor Stelling, for your presentation. It was most appreciated, and it's appreciated that you didn't sort of take too long to do it. So thanks very much for that. Steve, do you want to come back on any of those issues at this point in time?
Just one element, Chair, and I'm just measuring it now. I think the closest point to the village is not the 400 metres that Councillor Stelling has just taken. It's about 650.
Thanks very much for that, Steve. Thank you. Okay, so can we now move on? And we have one objector, and it is a resident of Medhamsley, Mrs. Neesham. Mrs. Neesham, could I invite you to give your presentation now? Remember that you are limited to 5 minutes, and when it reaches 4 minutes, there will be an interjection from the community services warning you that you have 1 minute left. Please don't let that put you off. If you just stop, take a breath and move on. I think that sometimes if people are not used to speaking in this forum, it can be a little bit of a put-off, but please, I'm warning you that that will happen, so I hope that you are able to accommodate that. Thanks very much, Mrs. Newsom. Can I hand over to you now?
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of a number of residents of Medhamsley Village. We're strongly objecting to this application, and we would like you to take our objections and our concerns into consideration when you're looking at this application. We are of the opinion that this application should be refused because it does contravene a number of planning policies. I'm just going to very quickly share my screen, and obviously I'm aware that that we've only got 5 minutes. One of the issues that the residents have is that this is an additional application for another 18,000 bird unit. There's already a 32,000 bird unit operating on the same farm. And when you're talking about the boundaries, we're talking about the boundaries of the farm and how close that is to the village rather than the actual buildings. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration. We'll have a cumulative impact of 50,000 birds on this farm, and that's what the residents are concerned about, the impact from this operation of 50,000. There's a DEFRA permit system which requires permits to be granted when there's a trigger of 40,000, and we're concerned that this is just increasing to avoid that trigger permit by putting in individual applications. We can't say that the DEFRA or the environmental agency has been consulted to this. We'd be very interested to know about their views on this and whether that incremental approach to extending the operations of this farm should be taken into account. We're concerned that there could be a further risk of infill units and further applications after this. The roadway that you've talked about is a substantial investment in this development. It's quite a long roadway up to to where they're proposing to site the building, which is completely at the opposite end of their existing building, and therefore we do feel that is a risk that will come along and say, well, we've got this road, we can now put another building in, can we apply for another building? It's been touched on before, but I do feel that I have to talk about it because it has been raised by a number of residents. We are in the midst of a pandemic. We've had previous outbreaks of avian flu. People are concerned that there will be a 50,000 bird unit located so close to a residential village. And it's also going to be located so close to the natural burial ground. And I'm not going to, overemphasise, but there is a concern about cross-contamination. And again, we're talking about the boundaries of the farm and the free-range chickens being located so close to the residential village, not just the actual building itself. Again, it's been touched upon, but again, we're concerned about the watercourse pollution. This is in an area of nitrogen vulnerable zone. We're concerned about the impact that could have onto the watercourses. It's an intensification of use, and again, what the impact is having on the North Wood and the Bullions Close Wood. Yes, there's tree planting for screening, but it's the whole of the area that we are concerned about. And again, the natural burial ground keeps cropping up in the residents' objections. And again, have there been any advice from DEFRA or the Environmental Agency regarding water purity? It is an area of high landscape value, and I think everybody's touched upon this, and this is where we think that it contravenes the planning policies. It's going to have an adverse effect on the views from all around the valley, not just on the rates from the road and Meddensley Village. We don't see how this application protects or enhances this area, which is what the policy states it should do. Although this is an agricultural building, it's a large industrial building. It's 5 metres in height, and it's really an industrial scale operation. And yes, okay, it's organic and it's free range, but there is going to be a large tri-shaped building on this site.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Okay, thank you. We feel that it's been sited closer to the village to avoid objections from Hampstead Hall and the residents of Hampstead. That we must enforce that the nuisance and the orders, this is a real concern to the visitors of the natural burial ground and to the residents of Meddensley. And, we are concerned that we will be affected by this. It's a very sensitive site. And again, we just want to, that Long Close Bank is a notorious winding bank. It's accident prone. And more traffic and slow moving traffic on this bank could have real problems for residents and commuters, because this is a heavily used road by the commuters of the area. And that really is just to summarise. We think it's against planning policy. We're concerned about the environment permit licence and the triggers for that. We're concerned about cross-contamination, the impact upon the area of high landscape value, and the nuisance factor caused to residents and to visitors to the burial ground, which has been located there purely because of its serenity and its peaceful nature.
Chair, that's 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Mrs. Newsom. Thank you for your presentation. Thanks for the clear way in which you provided your information. I think I'll pass over to Steve now. Steve, is there anything that you want to come back on there? And it might be, seen as an awful lot of it was about environmental, that maybe Mark would like to come in at this point?
I'll start if I may, Councillor.
Sorry, can I just ask, before you proceed further, can Mrs. Newsom stop sharing her presentation now, please? Thank you.
Okay, just briefly, as you say, Chair, there's overlap with what my more learned colleague from Environmental Health can say about this, and I'm sure my legal colleague can I would hope support this. Any requirements for consents under or licenses under other legislation, such as DEFRA, need to be handled separately and can't be duplicated by the planning process. The planning process does have some responsibilities in this instance in terms of the environmental impact assessments and the thresholds for when impact assessments and the like need to be submitted. In terms of the main impacts, the Schedule 1 impacts, those really come in at about 60,000 birds. Effectively, we've got a site here which is some distance from the existing one, and whether that's sited for operational reasons or to avoid the Hampsley Hall or whatever, we've got before us a specific application which we need to consider on its own merits. We don't necessarily consult DEFRA or the Environment Agency unless the thresholds for doing so are met. And I don't believe that's the case in this instance for what is a comparatively small scale operation in terms of the number of birds proposed. But if I don't know if Neil has any comment on that in terms of the duplication of legislation, and I'm happy to hand over to Mark from Environmental Health for his comments too.
Thanks very much. Mark, would you like to come in first, and then we'll see if Neil wants to say anything after that?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's a great deal of sort of clarification needed from Mrs. Neesham's comments. I think she raised very much the issues that I think have been covered in my response earlier as to what I believe the impact is going to be from an odour and a noise point of view. And you'll note as well that there are conditions suggested for matters such as noise, certainly. And the major issue with here seems to be that there's a difference with distances measured. When I've considered this, the issue as far as odour is concerned is from the building rather than the free ranging area. As I'm sure you'd be familiar, obviously, if the birds are free ranging, again, it's much like general use of fields by livestock, and these tend to not cause any odour issues because it's in the diffuse area, in the open area, and you tend to not get concentrations of odour. So it is the issue is from the actual extraction on the building, which is 650 metres removed from the village, is my understanding. That's the only point of clarification, Chair, unless members have any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Neil, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate really what the planning officer said about the need otherwise for an environmental permit, that is a separate regulatory regime that's outside the scope of planning. Equally, in terms of risks of contamination, pollution to watercourses, etc., as far as I'm aware, we've got no evidence whatsoever to suggest that is a risk or indeed likely. So again, I think in terms of weight to be afforded to that, it must be very limited, if any at all, really. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Neil. David, highways. It was mentioned there about highways. I know that highways have done some work on this. Can you maybe give us any information on the likely impact of highway? I mean, I realise that there are different access roads around that area, and I just wondered sort of what we're expecting the usage or increased usage to be from Medhamsley down to Hampsley Mill.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the route to the site, which is along Up Close Bank, now that is a strategic freight route through the county, so its primary function is to serve passengers and goods along that route. So the traffic associated with the larger moving vehicles, it's on the county's website as a strategic route for passengers and transport. In terms of the impact, it's an existing access from Southfield Lane onto this B road. And as I say, it's functioned without any issues, and we don't see any issues with that access operating onto the network. You've got the A694 further to the north of the site, which links to Long Close Bank, and it's over half a mile to this access junction. And yes, there is S-bends and it's windy in nature, but the level of traffic in terms of its trip generation per week, I think we're only looking at sort of four movements in and out per week, and also there was 2 staff, I think, that was mentioned that were going to be additional in terms of who'll be coming in and out of the site. So they're very low sort of traffic levels on that access, as I say, Chair, and members. And as I say, we don't foresee any issues with that. And obviously, it is. I would obviously just reiterate that it is a strategic freight route. It is for, you know, agricultural vehicles to use that route.
Thanks very much for that, David. I noticed that Councillor Tucker has got a request to speak. Councillor Tucker, can I just check, because I haven't opened this for discussion yet. All we're doing is we're looking at clarification on any of the points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is a point of clarity. I'm sorry, I can't get my chat function to work, so I'm having to go through Michael, so you'll have to forgive me. Councillor Tucker, Woodhouse Close. Chair, it would have been helpful if we could have had the red line for the boundary of this total property. My question would be, what proportion of the land would be open for the chickens to use for a free range purpose? How close to the boundary of the farm is the site actually for the purpose of this dwelling and this enterprise? So if that could be cleared up for me, that would be helpful.
Thanks very much, Councillor Tucker. Steve, I'm wondering, because we have Richard Tulip and Keith Henderson speaking in support of the application. Would it be best that they could maybe provide that information when they give their presentation?
I'll just briefly give my understanding of it, if I may, and then and obviously in retrospect, maybe the some degree of the various elements of land would have been useful for this display. But obviously there's a balance between letting the chickens free range, but also keeping them where you want them. You don't want them wandering off too far. So effectively, this affects a subdivided field, one field with boundaries round it. There will be 2 field separation which will be used for wildflower planting between the ranging chickens and the roadway, and there will be at least a full field of about, I think, 140 metres in length between this as it goes up the slope to the Greenfield burial site. So whilst the chickens can roam freely, they're not given unlimited range. Obviously, we want them back in the shed on an evening. So I just note that it is constrained by degree, and that does the range of the chicken does not go as far as the Greenfield burial site, the roadway, or the footpath at the bottom. But like you say, maybe Mr. Tulip and Mr. Henderson could give more detail on that.
Okay, are you happy with that, Councillor Tucker?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That helps.
Thanks very much. Okay, can we move on now? And we're moving on to the speakers in support. I'm addressing Mr. Tulip and Mr. Henderson here. Can I just ask, is there going to be one of you speaking for the 5 minutes, or are you splitting the time between you in some way?
We're going to be splitting the time.
And is it an equal split of 2.5 minutes each?
If I think Keith's going to say a few words first, and then he can just say that he can pass to me, and I can mute myself and just do it all in one.
Mine's two minutes, and then Richard can obviously use the rest of the time.
Okay, so you're going to speak first, Keith. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what we'll do is you're having 2 minutes. Do you want committee services to inform you when you have 30 seconds left?
Yes, please.
Okay, so committee services, if you can indicate when Mr. Henderson has 30 seconds left. He's indicated that he wants to speak for 2 minutes, and then we will move over to Mr. Tulip, who will have the remaining 2. And Mr. Tulip, you will have a warning when you have 30 seconds left from committee services. Are we okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So can I hand over to you now, Mr. Henderson?
Okay. Many thanks for the opportunity to speak at this planning committee meeting today. The Henderson family have been poultry farmers since the early 1970s. The block of land in question was purchased in 2019 and registered with the organic certification body to make this block of land financially viable for our family and employees. Organic free-range egg production is the highest welfare standard possible that is both sustainable and environmentally friendly. The organic standards require the shed to be centrally situated so that all the birds have access to the range. The councillor's point, our maximum range is 350 metres from the shed. This also means that there will be no artificial fertilisers, pesticides and antibiotics to be used on the farm. It is also important to note that no poultry manure will be spread on the farm to enhance our own bird welfare. We've taken the concerns of local residents on board and have made several changes to our pre-planning application. We have reduced the size by 50% from 36,000 to 18. The access road was amended to use the existing Southfield entrance. This means that eggs will also now be collected on the same wagons already collecting from the existing poultry unit on the site. The only increase in traffic will be one extra wagon movement each week for a feed delivery and obviously car journeys for the new staff.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
Installation equipment is inside the shed and must run quietly for bird welfare. Organic birds are stocked at a lower stocking rate, which requires less ventilation than conventional free-range production. Fans will run less often. This is a modern purpose-built poultry unit producing virtually no smell or sound. Southfield's existing poultry shed is situated less than 20 metres from two well-used footpaths, and we've not had a single complaint about noise or smell. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Richard,
just straight in. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for having the opportunity to speak today. And I'd just like to explain why Linds Hall Farm needs this organic free-range egg, and then go on to talk a little bit about the farm where I live, which has already been mentioned, Gallyburn. Linds Hall Farm is a family-run business based in the Derwent Valley, and we've been producing and selling eggs throughout the Northeast for 4 generations. And I must say, I am very, very proud of the fact that we now employ over 60 people directly, and many other ancillary businesses benefiting from the Linds Hall Farm business. Due to the changing buying habits, however, of consumers, all the major UK retailers have made commitments to phase out the sale of eggs produced by what is perceived to be lower welfare production systems. Now, these systems are still relatively new, of only about 10 years old, but they're already falling out of favour. And that has led to a massive increase in the demand for organic and free-range eggs. We now find ourselves in the position where we have no organic free-range to offer our customers, and we must be able to offer this very soon in order to keep our existing contracts and have any chance of attracting new customers. It can't be overstated, the importance of the success of this project and our ability to offer organic free-range eggs as part of our business strategy. As I said earlier, I do understand the concerns, of, I'd like to talk about my own farm because I take on board people's concerns. It's very important to me. My family have lived in this valley for 4 generations, and we've always worked as hard as we can to stick and listen to people's concerns and do the best we can. Obviously, down at Gallyburn Farm, we have 2 free-range chicken sheds housing 32,000 birds each. These sheds are only 300 metres from the housing estate at Hamsley Mill on the opposite side of the road, and we have had no complaints by any residents during the actual operation, and that's covered the last 10 years. This point is very well illustrated by the fact that during the planning process for the 2 sheds, they were completely different. The first one was built about 10 years ago, and that generated a huge amount of concern, which led to a long and challenging planning process for all involved. However, 5 years later, when we applied for the second shed, there was no objections, and the planning permission went through swiftly and smoothly. This is completely down to the fact that the residents of Hamsley Mill had 5 years experience of the chicken shed and realised that it had no impact on them. So
you have
just
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. Just for comparison, we have 64,000 chickens 300 metres from a big housing estate with no problems over 10 years. This new project is 18,000 hens that are going to be, as already stated, 650 metres away from the nearest houses. It's all of these, my own experience in lifelong experience of poultry farming, combined with the farm where I live and dealing with local residents, that I am confident, supremely confident, this will not adversely impact any residents in the local area, but it will have a very strong effect on the local economy.
That's 3 minutes, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Ivan, you're muted.
You're muted, Ivan.
Thank you. Sorry. Are there any questions that members wish to ask for clarification, please? It doesn't appear to be the case, so can I now open this up for discussion? So can you, if you wish to speak, can you request to speak? And we have first there Councillor Craig Martin. So Craig, could you speak now, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Craig Martin for North Lodge and Chelsea Street, and I'm speaking today also as somebody who's very much a avid walker. And I really do feel for the residents of Medhamsley. I know along the Teesdale Way there is a chicken farm, and when you walk past it, you get a really strong whiff. And even if you're on the other side of the valley, you can smell it from quite a distance away. But we need to remember that in planning applications, we have to take in good faith what the environmental health officer is saying to us on the standard of the buildings, we have to judge it on those terms and cannot judge it on the what ifs, etc. And I just want to raise another thing that, as I said, I'm an avid walker, and I am concerned about the sort of the damage to the enjoyment of walking around this very beautiful part of County Durham. But we need to remember that we get the privilege of walking on this land, on this agricultural land, on these really nice, well-maintained footpaths because of the landowners, because of the farmers who maintain this land and give us the ability to walk on it. The farmers also need to make a living, earn a living, create jobs off this land so that us who want to wander around their land can enjoy it as well. So there is also, we need to remember there are benefits to walking by giving employment opportunities for farmers in the agricultural industry as well, because we wouldn't have access to this nice land if they couldn't use it and earn a living off it. So I'm really after, for me, there are benefits to walking by allowing this application to go through. So I really need other councillors to tell me, to give me a really good reason why we need to object to this, to sort of sway me as I'm minded to approve this application right now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Can I now move on to Councillor Shield, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Alan Shield, representing the Ledgate and Medhamsley Division. Please excuse when I look at some of my notes if I don't look in at the screen. Before I make any comments about this application, I would like to highlight the fact, which has already been raised by Steve France, the planning officer, that there has been a number of complaints from Medhamsley villagers regarding only 22 properties in Medhamsley were contacted, while 72 properties in the Dipton area. My explanation of that was that it was probably the difference between perceived noise and odour pollution versus the perceived light pollution issues. This application has some mitigated proposals. However, as a local member, I believe there are more constructive reasons to refuse this application, given that the application is proposed within an area of high landscape value. But before you do that, I think what needs to be done is that we need to consider the planning balance. I have repeatedly read the planning officer's report, as well as the detail in the planning portal. The planning balance, both local and national, needs to be measured against the adverse impacts and must be very carefully considered to ensure that the benefits of the development clearly and demonstrably outweigh the impacts and harm that this development will cause. I understand that there's going to be 2 additional jobs created with this development, and also support for the current workforce, which is appreciated, and that the application does appear to fulfil consumer demand to accommodate the change from buying habits from intensive egg production to organic production. But I need to make 3 specific points about potential adverse impacts. Paragraph 15 states on the NPPF, conserving and enhancing the natural environment. And it states categorically that the planning system should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing local landscapes. Any decisions should ensure that any development is appropriate for its location, considering the likely effects of health, living conditions and natural environment, and the potential sensitivity of the site to impacts that could arise from this development. Paragraph 27 also states that the proposed location of this development will have adverse impacts on landscape and visual impacts within open, attractive, unspoiled countryside, and cumulatively these 3 freestanding sheds will have a negative visual impact on the Pond Valley landscape. And further, paragraph 22, 57 and 58, which all relate to the county plan, states that the development affecting areas of high landscape value will only be permitted where it conserves and enhances the special qualities of the surrounding vantage points. It is stated that this development will have some adverse negative landscape and visual effects, given the development is substantial, freestanding structures with open, attractive and unspoiled countryside, and it does not well relate to the farmstead. The proposed mitigation states that there will be a significant amount of cut and fill to accommodate the buildings, and that the use of low-pitched roof and juniper green cladding will help assimilate the development into its surroundings. It is not perceived that these will reduce the impact and effects to an acceptable level. So I cannot, in all sincerity, say how this proposed development, with all of the proposed mitigation, will ever achieve the requirement to conserve and enhance the natural environment and protect the landscape designation from this intrusive agricultural operation. I need to raise the concerns regarding residential amenity, and that the development will not be permitted where inappropriate odours, noise and light pollution cannot be suitably mitigated. Permission will not be granted near sensitive users, and the proximity of the operations to the residential properties must have adverse impacts unless they can be suitably mitigated. The location of the Seven Penny Meadows community burial site should be considered the most sensitive receptors. Don't like the word receptors, we should be talking about people. And grieving family members will spend some time there and their amenity will be compromised. I've read the order assessment, and it states that there'll be a significant amount of bird droppings which will occur outside the poultry sheds. This runoff and surface water leaches into the ground and permeates through natural watercourse into nearby Northwood and a larger field drain on the east side of Bullion Close Wood. This drain will inevitably pick up the runoff from the proposed application, which is on significantly elevated site, and thus natural drainage will transmit contaminated water towards the pond burn, which laterally feeds to the River Derwent. A question whether the officer had the opportunity to visit the site or whether their assessment has been accommodated due to the COVID lockdown and tier level restrictions via a desktop exercise. The order assessment also states that the proposed and wind direction, it's noted that the general wind direction is westward, but 7%, which equates to 25 days per year, will impact on those properties in Medhamsley closest to the proposed development site. And that will transmit odorous gases and most notably ammonia, which has a sharp, pungent smell causing eye irritation. And finally, Chair, I'd like to mention about highways. I acknowledge what the officer has said. He states quite clearly that it is a main arterial route, probably, if not the busiest B road, certainly in Northwest Durham, one of them. But in the report, it states that there is no reference at all that this steep winding road with a 60-mile-per-hour limit is a noted road traffic accident black spot. And residents rightly raise their concerns that HGVs slowly accessing or egressing entry into Southfield Farm may cause the risk of more road traffic accidents. Committee members may question why the planned development is the western end of a 600-metre constructed road adjacent to the existing track into Southfield Farm. The 600-metre road will incur significant capital costs just to put 3 separate poultry units, each with 6 birds, at the western end of the road. Or does it provide opportunity for future additional poultry development in the future? Members also need to be made aware that Lichfield's planning consultants, who have been commissioned by the owners of Hampstead Hall, the Grade 2 listed building referred to, have agreed to support the application, provided the development is 1,400 metres away because of cumulative odour issues from Hampstead Hall. And they have stated quite categorically that relocation of the unit closer to Hampstead Hall will not be acceptable and would be objected to in the strongest possible terms. Yet this proposed development is even closer to Medhamsley Village, comments between 400 metres and 600 metres. I'd like to have a slide rule and actually measure that because it's even closer to the border of the community burial site, 7 Penny Meadows. Need to tell members that I'm not against this application in principle, but I cannot support this development in its proposed location, even though I'm acknowledging all the proposed mitigation levels, because I do believe it contravenes specific policies of the NPPF and the newly adopted County Durham Plan. That is Part 15 of the NPPF, Part 10 of the County Durham Plan, Development of the Countryside, Part 31 of the County Durham Plan, Amenity and Pollution, and finally Part 39 of the County Durham Plan, Landscape. So I therefore move refusal of the application on the basis that the impact and harm that this development will cause demonstrably outweighs the benefit of this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shield. I was going to bring, we have three additional speakers, I believe, but I think maybe at this point it'd be useful to pull in officers to respond to the 2 previous speakers. Would that be okay with you, Steve?
Sure, Chair, I'll lead. What I'll do is I'll comment on the landscape issue, and then I'll hand over to Mark to discuss the environmental health issues on it. In terms of the landscape assessment on this is an application that's been with us not just because of the COVID period, but for some time, partly because the applicants have responded to some of the early criticisms of the scheme by officers, including landscape officers. And they have reflected the requirements of landscape officers in terms of how best to try and assimilate this into a landscape. Ultimately, this will be an agricultural building and it will be visible. To mitigate its presence isn't to hide it completely, so cutting it into the slope, screening it with hedges from the main public views. And the main public views, with the best one in the world, are along Close Bank, where there's a complex road both in terms of its nature twisting and in terms of the change in elevation. This, which doesn't offer sort of the motorist relaxed views of the site. Maybe for passengers, there will be a view of the building from the road as you're going past. From the footpaths, the site actually is on a small ledge in the slope as it goes down. In answer to your question, I had visited the site before the application process. The applicants will remember in inappropriate footwear. I did post the site notices up at the start of the COVID process. So I've not been on site during the application process, but slightly before it, yes. But effectively, the condition is such for landscaping that the landscape officers are satisfied that with the heightened expectations for mitigation in the area of high landscape value above those generally expected in the countryside, that the building can sit in that landscape comfortably. Like I say, it's not going to be screened, it's not going to be invisible, but there's sufficient mitigation to help it fit into the landscape. I'll hand over to Mark, but I would note at the end of some of the points you made, Councillor Shield, if there is any suggestion that there are more buildings on site or there is an intensification of this use, planning permission would be required. Late on in the process, to try and address some of those concerns, the specific number of birds was put into the description and would be part of any approval if it should get that far. But effectively, you do have future control over future expansion if you're worried about that aspect of it. I'll hand over to Mark now, if I may.
Thank you, Steve. I think I've got 2 points that sort of need clarification. One's from Councillor Martin about walking past a chicken farm, there being significant odour. I'll cast members' minds back to an application that they permitted last year for development of a few houses next to a large chicken farm that was in about 50 metres away from the chicken farm, I understand. I understand when members went to visit, there was a significant odour attached to it. That is an old broiler type chicken shed with old outdated technology on it, circa sort of 20, 30 years ago. These, for a start, laying units are very different in the respect that they don't smell anywhere nearly as badly as broiler sheds, and free range even more so. And purpose-built buildings with significant modern technology on them reduce that even further. So although members might be familiar with the odour from chicken farms, that can differ significantly depending upon the nature of the farm and what technologies are associated with it. And a point from Councillor Shield as well, with the 7% of the wind issue, whereby I believe he said that the village would be affected for 26 days. The figure was 6.24% for the frequency of wind, which is towards the direction of residential. However, there's a fair amount of different issues as well that affect what the likely odour is going to be, such as the odour that's emitted from it, and actually what the wind strength is like and the weather is like at that point. You tend to actually not get a great deal of odour associated with higher wind. It tends to be lower level wind when it is basically odour is fugitive and is swirling around. Actually, at the distance involved, 600 odd metres, it's unlikely that even when the wind is blowing towards them that there will be a great deal of transferal, and this is why the pathway is described as being very poor. So even though these 26 days there is a greater potential, it's unlikely really that there would be a great deal of odour, with the exception of, I believe, on the days when the building's being cleaned out, because that's the point at which the waste is being disturbed and there is quite a lot more odour associated with this. Again, Mr. Tulip mentioned about the units in Hamsterley. Again, similar sort of units closer to residential, and we in environmental health have not received a complaint associated with that. And if anybody's familiar with the sort of Hamsterley village, it is likely, if there had been odour, that we would certainly have received a complaint. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Neil, legal, do you have any comments to make on legal aspects, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just briefly, I wanted to mention about paragraph 11 of the NPPF. So that's the tilted balance test that you are probably all familiar with over the last sort of couple of years or so. That isn't relevant anymore. So to the extent that it's being suggested that there was a tilted balance test from paragraph 11 to be applied, there isn't. And the reason for that is we've now got an up-to-date development plan. So that tilted balance test in paragraph 11 only applied when we didn't have an up-to-date development plan and our policies were out of date. That's not the case anymore. So the application must be determined against the up-to-date development plan, which is the County Durham plan, and any other material considerations. So there can always be a balancing exercise between policy requirements and other material considerations, but it's not a tilted balance exercise anymore.
Sorry,
I was just going to say I do have some concerns if members are looking to refuse this based upon residential amenity impacts. You know, we've heard quite extensively from environmental health. It is quite a technical area in terms of noise impacts, etc. The clear advice is that that this development would be acceptable subject to imposition of necessary conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Neil, and thank you to all of the officers for clarifying those points. I'll move swiftly on now, and I'm going back to the list of people requesting to speak. Councillor David Boyes, you have a request to speak. Would you like to speak now, please?
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Chair. Like Councillor Shield, I was concerned about highways, pollution, landscape issues, and I appreciate his local knowledge on these issues. Having said that, I was happy with what the officers, the highways officers, landscape officers, environmental officers have said about the mitigation measures that's being put in place. We either accept what they're saying or we don't accept what they're saying. Councillor Shield said he acknowledged it, but he didn't accept it. So it's whether we accept and acknowledge that there will be mitigation measures put in place. I'm happy that it's 650 metres away from the local village. And you know, I represent, sorry, I should have said at the beginning, I'm Dave Boyes, I represent the Easington division. I represent a former mining village, and we had like a pit going 24/7, but we acknowledged it and we were happy for that because it served the greater good. Now, I think this particular proposal is going to serve the greater good in respect of keeping jobs, in respect of like sort of keeping an ongoing business going, but on an ethical point of view, I would much rather see these chickens running around free range rather than cooped up in like a sort of the battery industrial scheme that we used to have. So I'm quite happy to support this scheme. I'm quite happy that the officers and the applicants have said that they've put mitigation measures in place, and I'm happy to propose this as if we're moving forward with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are you proposing acceptance of this scheme, Councillor Boyes?
Yes, I am, Chair.
That's fine. I just needed to clarify that. Can we now move on to Councillor Boyd, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just felt that we were getting some contradictory information, and you've already brought in the relevant officers, because like you say, this is quite a balancing act of how we make the decision, and there's been some very good points raised all round. I think on balance of consideration, I'd like to second Councillor Boyes' proposal to accept the offer, to accept the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd, and I'm pleased that we've clarified some points up for you. Thanks very much. Can I now move on to Councillor Tucker, please?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could direct a couple of questions to the applicant, Mr. Henderson, please. Mr. Henderson, do you have other structures on your site, barns, sheds for agricultural machinery, etc.?
Could you answer that, Mr. Henderson, please? Or I'm just wondering, Councillor Tucker, where this comes in. What we're doing is we're considering this application. You're sort of tend to be bringing something additional in.
No, I think because we didn't have a site visit, Chair, I'm struggling to visualise the environment and what is visible from the roadway, from the pathway, what other structures might be visible. We're saying that this is this proposed structure is visible from other areas of the landscape. I'm just trying to get a feel for the rest of the landscape and what else is on this site. Just I'm sitting on the fence on this one, and I'm mindful that a refusal could, cause problems for down the line. But I just wanted some clarity on the whole structure.
Can I come to legal? Legal, do you feel that this would be appropriate in terms of the overall application?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't think there's any particular problem with Councillor Tucker wanting to receive some further details about what the sort of overall layout of the wider site is. I mean, I don't know whether the planning officer might be in a position to provide that, or whether the applicant's the best person. I'm happy to leave that discussion.
Sorry, legal. Chair, if I may, what I'm trying to determine is if there are other structures on the site, and what they made of, were the mitigations put in place for these structures, or is the same level of mitigation being put in for any potential barns that we're asking the applicant to put in for these new structures? That's basically it, just so I can visualise the landscape.
Could I suggest maybe that Fiona puts the aerial view on the screen from the presentation, please?
That would be helpful.
You have the site there pinned, and with the yellow pin, the village to the west there. You can see the road going along the top of the screen as it drops down. The Greenfield burial site is the light area just between the village and that dark brown square at the top of the screen. The entrance, you can see the existing farm buildings down at the top right hand corner, and the existing chicken shed to the right of that. There's actually a public footpath that runs immediately down the side of that, and there was no screening put in for that, because effectively the view of that was either immediate, where you weren't going to affect it, or in long views from the escarpment looking in the distance over Pontburn to Dipton. So there's been alternate views between the building being too close to the village and too close to buildings, but also trying to stop a cumulative effect of it in the countryside. Now, with the best will in the world, the egg production industry is a feature of the landscape, as I've said a few times here. And if you stand on the site, you can see distant views of other egg production units beyond the one you can see there. So it's a balance between trying to get a viable, modern, economic agricultural operation that's spaced out far enough so it's not intrusive, so it doesn't become a huge cumulative site, and spread it appropriately, so that it doesn't start being too much of an intrusion. It's scattered across the landscape rather than communally concentrated on one part of it. You can see that the site is open countryside for the most part, whether it's the surrounding roads or countryside. If you're walking or driving through there, you're in countryside. You don't think you're in an urban area or close to an urban area in any way until you hit the village. And even then, it's a fairly gentle approach into the village from the farm conversion on the right-hand side at East Farm. The one thing the aerial photograph doesn't show is the landform. The village is on a plateau and slopes fairly gently down towards the Greenfield burial site, but then does start to slope steeper down the long close bank, which is why it has a reputation for being a difficult highway to negotiate. That's come through from the representations, albeit, as Dave from Highways said, it's the principal highways route that's capable of taking that sort of traffic. Does that help?
Steve, it doesn't. I'm afraid it was very informative, but it's not giving me what I would like to ask. Could I please ask Mr. Henderson? on the site, on his whole farm, I'm assuming there's a farmhouse. Does he have a storage facilities for maybe agricultural equipment? Does he have a barn?
If I can come in here, yes, there is, next to the house, there is an existing, what you would say, a conventional farmsteading. And then the chicken shed that we built in 2016 is 120 metres away from our existing home.
Okay.
So there's a cottage and a home. That's where my wife and I live in the house. My daughter lives in the cottage, and it's a traditional farm at that point. The reason, if I can try and make the point to help, the reason that we don't want chicken sheds next to chicken sheds is both. So say the RSPCA mean that we have to have a 350 meters maximum layout area that they can range on, but obviously that can't go over the top of an existing shed. It must also have 350 meters. So siting a shed is not just as easy as putting two together. You've almost got to say, and what we've also done here is, this is an area where it also doesn't run over another, like put a footpath in the middle of the range area for the chickens, and certain areas of this new block of land. To do it anywhere else, we would impact on a footpath or something like that. So this sits in an area where we think is of less impact.
Mr. Henderson, just one further question, if I could. The farmhouse and the existing structures near your farmhouse, are they visible from outside of the boundary of your property?
No. Well, they are visibly, definitely, yes, from the Dipton, I'm trying to think where the crematorium is at the top of Dipton. If you're from there, it's visible.
Right. Thank you. That helps. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Tugger. Can I pull in Councillor Bell now, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm just conscious you might have missed out Councillor Boyd. I'm not sure if she was waiting to speak before me.
She already did speak.
Sorry, I missed that. Sorry, I apologise. Yeah, we should have had Councillor Richardson, our in-house councillor with farmer knowledge on this case. That would have helped. Yeah, no, it's always great to see, such applications, moving away from the intensive sort of what Councillor Boyd's referred to there, like the cage hens, what have you. But obviously at the same time, we need to take on the local concerns from the local members. But at the same time, I also respect like the environmental health and the work what's being done to address local members' concerns, or all the members' concerns in relation to orders and sort of the visual appearance, what have you. There's just a couple of things I just wanted clarification on, and one was when the birds are outside in the field area. Obviously 18,000 birds is a lot of birds. Will that, obviously the field they use will be intensified, and I guess it's difficult to clean fields, or is that not necessary in relation to any orders coming off that? And the second point was just to raise was in relation to, got mentioned, I've just been reading the report in relation to, and Steve also said it was screening, it wasn't like sort of down for any screening in here. And I take on board that one of the objections in the report was like the visual appearance of the buildings. Was this considered in relation to screening, or is it not necessary because it's so far away? And them are the 2 points in relation to the field, the order, and then secondly was the screening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. What I'll do is I'll pull Councillor Bainbridge in at this point and then go to the officers for answers to the questions that have been asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Alan Bainbridge from Chesley Street South. My concern is the road which is being proposed. It's a fairly long road, and is this road going to be like a farm track, or is it going to be up to County Council standards? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, can I now bring the officers in for the last three? That was Councillor Tucker's point, Councillor Bell's point, and Councillor Bainbridge's point.
Can I work backwards through those and maybe suggest that in terms of a description of the detailed operation, how the birds use the land, we defer back to the applicants if they could provide some more information of that.
Okay.
I mean, for the roadway, it's part of the landscaping scheme and the requirements of landscape officers, both that this is agreed through the landscaping that this is not going to be a tarmac adoptable standard road. They've made specific requirements in terms of the colour of it and the nature of it, so it will be an agricultural track that is capable of taking heavy vehicles, obviously. But it's going to be, you know, bedded chippings and dark grey. It's not going to be a feature of the landscape, and it's also going to reflect. It's going to be moved very slightly to reflect the root plates of the trees in the adjacent woodland as part of the proposed landscaping scheme. And for the issue about the hedges, again, another element of the landscaping scheme was that the landscape officers thought that there wasn't sufficient mitigation being put in for the hedge lines immediately adjacent and in the field parallel to Long Close Bank to protect the views from the road, both in terms of the planting and where it was going. And so the condition for the landscaping scheme is to agree the details of that. It's been discussed with the applicants in terms of their acquiescence to it, and they have no problem with this. And effectively, it won't be the overlay land to screen it off and hide it with something else that's equally obtrusive. There will be a indigenous deciduous replanting and regapping of the hedgerows to effectively have a natural series of barriers which will take the edge off this building in that view. Do you want me to hand over to Mr. Henderson, Mr. Tulip, in terms of how the birds move on the land?
Yes, you could do.
To address that, free-range chickens, as a general rule, have access during daylight hours. So the pop holes will open probably about 8 o'clock in the morning and will shut just after dusk. Bird movements will mean that all of the birds do not go out at the same time. They go in and out as the feeders and water is in the chicken shed. So certain birds will come out for hours and go back into the shed. It is very rare that birds actually get to the periphery of the range. They stay fairly close to the chicken shed. So I would say probably, in my experience, more birds will range in the first 100 meters than anywhere else. And the muck that goes on that land is well managed at turnaround, and it is exactly the same. That range will not only be ranged by chickens, but also will have access to the animals that we currently have on. So there will be sheep and cattle will also range on that land as normal.
If I could just add a little extra there, please, if I may. Just again comparing it to Gallyburn Farm where I live, the fields that the chickens can range on in my farm go right up to the main road, which is straight opposite the shed. So the houses are literally on the other side of the road from where my birds can range to, and they rarely go to that extent of the field. You might get the odd one or two, but anecdotally, we've had that system in place for 10 years and we've had no complaints, and the environmental officer confirmed that earlier. He also did say that the smell from outside is virtually non-existent just because of the nature of being outside and the way the birds, it's a very small amount of birds going to the far reaches. So yeah, our fields go right up to the houses. The birds rarely venture that far, but when they do, there's a handful. And again, we've had no issues for 10 years.
Thank you, Keith and Richard, for that one. Can I come back to members now? I don't have anyone else recorded to speak at this time. Can I just put a last call out? Is there any other members who wish to speak to this particular application? I will take that as a no. So I'll just look at where we are at the situation, because we are going to need to put this to the vote. The way I see it, what we had a proposal by Councillor Shield, which suggested refusal of the application, but we don't have a seconder for that. We have a proposal for Councillor Boyes, which was for acceptance of the application, and we have a seconder for that one, which was Councillor Boyd. Legal, we move straight to the vote on the proposal which has a seconder.
Yes, Chair, that would be the appropriate way to do it. So we have a motion and a seconder, so that needs to be put to the vote. So if you want me to do that now, I can progress it.
Yes, what I will do is I'm putting this to the vote. What will happen is Neil, our solicitor, will go through members of the committee and they will ask if they are in agreement with the proposal or against, and we work through it that way. Thanks very much, Neil. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm now going to come to each member of the committee and ask you if you're for or against, and this is for the decision to approve the application in accordance with the officer's recommendation in the report. So I'll start with Councillor Bainbridge. Are you for or against?
For the application.
Thank you. Councillor Bell?
Yes, for the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Boyd?
For the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Boyes?
For the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Higgins?
For the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Hopgood?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Milburn?
For the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Martin?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
For the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Shield? Councillor Shield, are you able to say whether you're for or against?
Beg your pardon, I was still muted. Against the proposal, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shuttleworth?
For the application.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
For the application.
Councillor Tucker?
For the application.
Chair, that's 12 in favour and 1 against.
Thank you very much for that, Neil, and thank you, members, for your participation in this application. Can I say that this application has been successful? Thank you for everyone who has attended. Those of you that don't need to be here for the next item on the agenda, you can leave now and we will progress with our business. Thank you very much. Are you wishing to stay, Keith, or do you want to leave? Okay. Okay, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Keith being here if he wants to be here, so I think we'll progress. Time is rolling on. So can we move on to our second application to be determined this morning? It is application BM 20-007-12 land to the south of West Pelton Primary School, and the pages are 37 to 56 in your pack. Can I hand this over to Steve again, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll see if I can produce the right committee presentation for you this time. Right, that does look like the right one. And now for something completely different, as they say. This is an application for moving by itself. 1 2-storey detached dwelling. Sorry, this has got a mind of its own. 8 glamping pods with a new site entrance, a vertical access wind turbine, and a play area, protected fence and landform. Effectively, an application in two parts, but mutually interlinked between the dwelling and a glamping pod, which is fancy camping, basically, for the uninitiated. The application site is at West Pelton, a small village. Just you can see the main road at the top there. And the village has actually already been referred to in the committee meeting here today, because it's where the application for the housing on the Jingling Gate was, at the end of Twisel Lane, just off the screen to the left. Around the village crossroads, you can see south west of the village there is a tree surrounded field with a building in it, and that is the primary school, and one of the interested parties in this. The village is a former colliery village. And you can see the traditional houses along Twisel Lane with the allotment area behind. There is an extensive area of both modern development at the village crossroads, which is so new it's not actually on the plan there by a registered social landlord, and the local authority built dwellings to the northeast of the crossroads. The site is, as you can see, the square field below the school to the south of it, and effectively the development area is defined in red there, with a blue line incorporating the extended land ownership where there's proposed planting and drainage. You can see the existing village on the other side of the road, to the east of the road opposite the site. There's a cleared brownfield site where there's a former public house. There's a short run of a cul-de-sac. And then there's the edge of the village, there's a high density development of apartments. Effectively, where the red line of the site stops at the south, the land starts to fall down steeply, and there's various detached buildings in the countryside, dwellings with other leisure uses in the area, a golf course on the other side of the road. The Concert to Sunderland cycle walk path is just the other side of the main road to the top, and it's obviously a short distance to the Beamish experience from here. The site itself is a field, so not great in terms of photographing. The unimproved grassland is shown clearly at the top left. Photograph at the top right shows looks up towards the boundary with the school, with the mature trees along the boundary there. The boundary itself is actually formed with the trees inside the site by one of those green palisade fences to secure the children inside there and separate from the land. The bottom left potentially shows back towards the village, depending on the size of your screen, and you can see how the land drops away as the site falls towards the bottom of the extended blue land. The picture on the bottom right shows from the bottom of that slope looking back up towards the open land on the field. Difficult really to show you anything other than that it is a sort of grassland. There is a public footpath that runs along the bottom of the field, and some desire lines, as we call them. You can see one on the top right hand photograph around the edges where local dog walkers informally walk around the area. This is the adjacent roadside. The top picture is looking back up towards the village and the crossroads. You can see the existing hedge on the left-hand side. You can see the brownfield development site with a development opportunity sign on it opposite, and the bungalows of that short cul-de-sac just behind. Beyond that, the village itself features a range of different ages and types of houses, from flats to an old grander house and terraced houses, and pretty much covering of everything. Top right is the apartment block, which is a little bit by itself now, but obviously the brownfield site in terms of the form of the village is considered part of the village. And you can see there how the road drops off towards the south. Bottom left is a look into the throat of the cul-de-sac itself. You can see the nearest bungalow is screened to a degree by the wall and set down slightly. And then the picture at the bottom right is looking towards the site from Twisel Lane. So you're looking along the hedge. The trees you can see beyond that are those around the school site, and you can just see in the distance over the field in the foreground the hedge which defines the edge of the site, and then beyond that maybe some of the buildings beyond. What is proposed is a single entrance to the site with the existing roadside hedge having to be moved to accommodate the visibility splay required for that for the roadway. You can see at the top of the site there is a U-shaped road. It doesn't continue around a play area around which there are 8 glamping pods. Now, the application during its course has been reduced from 12, and whilst the previous ones are ghosted in there for possible future, they're not part of the current application, and it's very specific that this is for 12, and any addition to those, any intensification of the leisure use would require a grant of further planning permission. Again, this is an application that's been in for some time because of the COVID process, and the applicant's taken the opportunity to use that extended time period to try and mitigate and reduce some of the perceived impacts from the consultation exercise. So in addition to reducing the number and therefore any potential effects on the vicinity, you can see at the top of the screen where the school is, the landscaping there was originally proposed for free-range campers, if you want, to overlap from the last application, but given concerns from the school and from local residents and the school governors about the potential for safeguarding issues from the proximity of the two uses, that landscaping is proposed fenced off, so there's effectively a barrier, a buffer, physical buffer and visual buffer between the glamping use and the school. That has an additional benefit in that the county ecologist doesn't really like people mingling with his wildlife, so effectively that area is turned over for wildlife, and there's an opportunity for that to be segregated and perhaps better established for that use. I'll show you what the glamping units look like in a moment, but obviously you can see the square house, which is of a particularly unusual design, at the bottom there. The house sits on the edge of the lip where the site falls down, and to a degree is cut into the site. It's an unusual bespoke design and is proposed both as a dwelling for the applicant and to have an overseeing and a management role for the camping as well. And you'll see from the list of conditions appended that that is tied into the approval, so the two uses have to sit together. If then we look at the proposed glamping pods, you can see from the size of them, both in relation to the car and the layout, you can see at the top right, there's a double bedroom at the top right of the floor layout with a shower room next to it, a kitchen sink, and then a living room with a settee in it, which might have the opportunity for a sofa bed. So in terms of the size of the unit, these are small. You can also see from the design that they have a single point of opening, which is looking into the site and towards that playground, and there's no other windows or places where noise can get out of them. So they're small in scale and restricted in nature. So 8 of these proposed around the area of the site to the north, where closest to the school. The house is an architect-designed, high-level, sustainable dwelling. It has a sedum roof, and you can see it's quite striking in design. The application is a resubmission, and originally this was white all over, and in the resubmission at officer's suggestion, it's been toned down slightly, particularly in longer views, with the insertion of these panels, just to not take away from the drama of the design, but just to mitigate its appearance potentially in longer views. You've got the artist's impression at the top and the respective illustrations below. There is another elevation, obviously, but obviously every time we put something new on a slide, it gets smaller and smaller. You can see at the section at the bottom that there is a degree of cutting in for the dwelling to, again, reduce its appearance in the landscape. And you can see how that cuts in, and behind the house there, not visible from it, there is a large garage block which is to be buried under a bund, which has the trees on that you can see behind the house. So again, that should not be available. That should not be visible in its own right from the road, and should help screen the house visibility from the site. If I go backwards too, you can see the large buffer of landscaping to the right, to the east of the proposed house. Effectively, that sits behind the bund and helps separate from the road. There are pros and cons in that, in how that helps integrate into the village, but there's a balanced approach to this in providing a new, exciting looking architect design property that fits in with the grain of the village, but is not obtrusive because of its nature and the materials used. To quickly go through your report, with the extended visibility display proposed as part of this, the highways officer has no objections to this, subject to conditions on it being implemented before any part of the use comes into effect. Northumbrian Water and the Coal Authority have suggested standard conditions for the application, which are appended at the end of the report. Internally, there's a judgment view on this. Effectively, this is another countryside site, and the landscape officers say this has a transformative effect, and in their view, this is not in keeping with the character and form of the existing settlement. Any new development in open countryside is going to be transformative, and the two aspects to this are whether it can be integrated in terms of whether it's both cut into the site and the landscaping available, and then whether it's appropriate in terms of the character and form of the settlement. And I'll wait to be questioned and interested in your views on that. My view is that with the extension of modern development on the other side of the road, that the modern settlement has extended in this direction, and that can justify the house as part of the wider scheme. Now, the wider scheme is that the glamping element of it, which obviously is something that's appropriate in the countryside. So there's a balance on the effect of the house in the countryside as something new and the appropriateness of the glamping in the countryside. Conversely, some residents have complained about the appropriateness of the glamping element next to a settlement. So there's judgments involved in there. For the internal consultees, otherwise, the environmental health officer asked for condition of a management plan in terms of the potential effects on residential amenity. I will touch back on this later in this presentation with a request for you in terms of what's been suggested for that and a slight amendment to it. But effectively, with the reduction in numbers and the likely effect of activities on the use in terms of residential amenity is something that my colleague Mark Anslow, I'm sure, will be happy to answer questions on. Likewise, the operation of the wind turbine has a condition on it to make sure that in terms of his expectations of a reasonable noise impact, that those are ensured on site. The wind turbine has also been checked through late in the process at the request of the county solicitor with Newcastle Airport to make sure that it doesn't interfere with their radars, and you'll be glad to hear that it won't. Effectively, conditions are proposed for the environmental health officer, but I will come on to that. An important additional element of the relationship to surrounded land uses is the relationship of the glamping to the school, with concerns from local residents, but also from the head teacher and governors about the activities of holidaymakers in relation to the school, both for safeguarding issues and in terms of just general disruption as well, I think, and those are set out in your report. For other consultees, the scale of the scheme is not really one that the drainage team would really comment on, and they noted that there is control over this aspect through the building regulation process, and there's a precautionary condition at the end of the report for this. But they do note that in terms of the proposed methods of dealing with both surface and foul water, that it is their proposed messages, and the basic layout of what's proposed is something that they'd be expecting in an application, although they haven't commented on it in detail. With a leisure implication for this, Visit County Durham have written with their support. The applicants have been in touch with the organisation to find out their research and information, and a business plan to show that this is potentially viable. A requirement of policy 10 for new development in the countryside has been submitted as part of the application. At the bottom part of the site to the south, i.e. the half of the site that's not affected by development, but where the drainage would go and effectively the percolation, there is a public footpath where there will be a glimpsed view potentially of the house, but no more than that. There's no direct impact on that. We have looked, as I mentioned before, that there are desire lines across and around the edge of the site, but there's been no formal request to examine any of those as public rights of way, no claims. And this has been discussed in terms of the impacts and the alternatives for that with the County Footpaths Officer. And at present, the application is not contentious in that regard. For ecology, the proposals are acceptable. There's a slight change to the report I'd like to mention here. The need to secure a management plan was suggested by the county ecologist, you'll see from the report, as a Section 106 agreement, which is a fairly cumbersome legal agreement through the planning system. That was put into my report as a suggested condition, but the county ecologist, and discussing with the county solicitor, has confirmed a better vehicle for that, particularly in terms of securing the 30-year management plan for it, would be through a Section 39 agreement tied through the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So if you are minded to approve this, if we could do it with an amended condition for the ecology, I would be grateful for a note of that. The tree officer, in commenting on this, basically said that there weren't any surveys put in for the trees around the edges of the site. There's two dimensions for that, and in terms of local authority, we try to be proportionate when asking for information. And given the trees he was referring to in the main, with those along the school boundary, and there's a clear separation of the development for those, it did seem disproportionate to act for that, so that wasn't requested. The hedgerows around the west and south of the site are likewise unaffected, but then in principle, the hedgerow that needs to come out for the visibility splay will be lost in principle. So for survey work, it's more a matter of principle rather than the detail of what's already there. The specification for the replacement hedge at the edge of the new visibility splay would be within the remit of the landscaping condition. We would have control over the species to make sure it was proper in terms of its visual effect and its ecology effect. For the public consultation exercise, we sent out 138 letters and posted a site notice on the highway opposite the site. And we've got 20 responses. It says around because some are duplicates and some overlap slightly. But mostly local residents from the dwellings in the two developments opposite, the apartments and the small cul-de-sac, and also from the CPRE and from the head teacher and school governors. Principal objections related to development in the countryside outside the natural form of the village. Highways concerns are significant, particularly in relation to the operation of the school day, children from the village crossing over the road to the main entrance of the school, which isn't on this road, it's round the corner at Twisel Lane. But obviously there's pedestrian school traffic in the morning associated with that. Both children and the elderly are particularly likely to be put at risk, according to the residents, by the presence of strangers in the village. And that relates to, I think, just general incoming of people they don't know, but in particular to the safeguarding issues I referred to before. It's considered that the glamping is inappropriate near urban area and could be extended at a later date. Like I say, we have control over that. And the proposal would have an unacceptable residential amenity implication, that the dwellings and the pods are unjustified and alien the surroundings, and that the location for this use is unacceptable, loss of wildlife habitats unacceptable, and there are drainage concerns. Like I said, the school governors and the head teacher were supported by the safeguarding officer from the council, whose comments I'll come on to. Tell you what, can I just go back? There was I think I managed to. Apologies for this. It seems to have skipped in the presentation. I think I missed a slide there. Apologies, I'm struggling with screens here. I'd done Visit County Durham and trees. Apologies. The planning considerations. I'll try and be brief. In principle term, it's a development on an unallocated site and an unallocated site in the countryside. It's visitor accommodation, which should be in the countryside, but residents don't like it near the village. Conversely, the house is objected to as outside the village and not related to it. So the two policy principles of this are pulling against each other. But in terms of the overall development and how it can be secured, I've come to the conclusion that this can be argued as policy compliant. For highway safety, The highways officer is here to answer your questions, but the traffic generation should not coincide with the main usage of the school. The amount of traffic that will be generated by the volume of development on the site is not huge. And the highways assessment has concluded that, subject to the conditions set out, that this is policy compliant. For residential amenity, as I've mentioned, there's been fences put in and barriers to separate out, and a reduction in numbers, and also some controls on the wind turbine. I'd like to mention here, if I may, that there's a site management plan in terms of the operation of the glamping put in here. And again, if you are minded to support this, in terms of the planning control of the site and the reasonableness of conditioning that, it probably goes beyond our remit. In terms of some of the elements that have been put in it for instance, for checking people's criminal records. That goes beyond our remit, and we're not quite sure how that would work. So if you are minded to approve a condition changed to bring the management plan into compliance with the control of the planning system, would be gratefully received, albeit obviously if the applicant chooses to go beyond that and manage it further outside our control, they're quite welcome to do that. There has been significant objection from the school. The glamping, like I say, has been separated and the CCTV put in, and some of the elements of the management plan in terms of registering staff to make sure they're appropriate to be around children on the site and the like, do help mitigate the concerns where they are relevant to the planning process. However, residents' objections to the scheme have not receded on the reconsultation. Other issues are for drainage. Like I say, that can be dealt with through the building regulation process appropriately. I've mentioned that any intensification of the camping use must be within the control of the planning department and councillors with another application. Ecology can be met and net biodiversity gains with the amended condition on site. There's no effect on the radars, and the tree implications are implicit within the ecology and landscaping scheme. So in conclusion, it's my opinion that the effects on the landscape can be mitigated through the submitted design, cutting it into the landscape and the appropriate landscaping scheme. The relationship to the school has been mitigated to an appropriate degree through the separation and the appropriate elements of the management plan. The changes to the scheme and the management plan do mitigate the elements of control both of residents and the school, in my view, and the scheme is supported as economic development by Visit County Durham in bringing further economic developments directly to the village, the support of the little shop that's there, and to the wider area in terms of the activity of the campus. Thank you for that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Steve. Okay, are there any points of clarification any member wants to put to Steve? I take that as a no. Thanks very much. And so we'll move straight in, and we have Councillor Danny Wood, who is speaking as the local member and he is objecting, I believe, to this particular application. Danny, it's over to you. As I always say, if you can make this as brief as possible. I'm not asking you to reduce or leave things out. It's just that it's been a long morning so far, and if we can make it as short and concise as possible, that would be much appreciated. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. And can just assure yourself and members that my comments will be very succinct and very brief, and hopefully we could all move on. So I appreciate it has been a long sitting. So obviously I'm here today as a local ward member and to speak on this application. And in the interest of full disclosure, I am also a local authority school governor at West Pelton School, but I haven't been double counted as such because several other school governors, including the chair, have also raised concerns about this through the planning portal. So can I thank officers for their presentation, but also note that since the original application was submitted, it's fair to say that the goalposts have moved a lot on this one due to the adoption of the County Durham plan. The reasons that I originally called this application into committee back in March were due to the proximity of the site to West Pelton Primary School, the location of the site outside of the traditional boundary of the village of West Pelton, concerns about access to the site, and also the level of objections from nearby residents. As members will be aware, there have been significant changes since this application was first submitted. I did think it was interesting that it was described in the officer's presentation as a response to the consultation exercise, but it was in fact an application that came in without any pre-consultation with the school or with local residents, and at the time of that original application it was also done without any pre-application advice from our planning officers. So the consultation exercise itself was actually the statutory consultation on the original planning application, and that has made it much more difficult in terms of the local community to address it. That application was withdrawn following objections, and there clearly has been work with planning officers to mitigate some of the concerns that had been raised. Whilst mitigations have been put in place to address the access arrangements, significant objections remain to the development of this site, which is still adjacent to a local primary school and is still located outside of the boundary of West Pelton. Those issues haven't been addressed by the changes. Before the adoption of the County Durham Plan, the Chester Street Local Plan did provide a settlement boundary for the village of West Pelton, and this site wasn't inside of it. Looking at the provisions of the County Durham Plan, this site was actually considered as a potential site for housing development, but was not included, as in the planning department's own words, the site is on the edge of the settlement and development on this site would encroach into the open countryside beyond natural defensible boundaries. Development would result in significant adverse residual landscape impacts. Further concerns that are still outstanding, certainly from my point of view as a local member, are around issues with around water supply and drainage. On the water supply front, we did have a fire at Twisel Hall Farm, and at the time there was insufficient water pressure from the nearest fire hydrant, which was a considerable distance away, to enable the fire service to tackle this effectively. On the issue of drainage, there are existing issues downhill of the site, which obviously the officers have mentioned does slope down towards Grange Villa. In particular, there are problems with the highway flooding and also the impact on the nearest property within Grange Villa, which is the old chapel at the end of Stone Row, which is at the downhill of the site at the bottom of the hill, really from West Pelton. As far as I can see from this application, additional development at this site could contribute to these existing problems, but any offload from the site that did come off the site is still going down the hill towards those other properties. I would ask the committee to consider that there are two distinct parts to this application that are very different. If the single property on the site were considered without the glamping pod element, my view is that even under the County Durham Plan, this would likely constitute ribbon development between the villages of West Pelton and Grange Villa and would be unlikely to be recommended for approval. By including the glamping element, the application becomes more palatable in planning terms. However, I must stress to members the significant level of objections from local residents, and also the fact that the development of this site was deemed by County Council officers to be an encroachment into the open countryside beyond natural and defensible boundaries. And in light of this, I'm asking the committee to refuse this application today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Could I invite maybe our planners to come back on any of those points, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the house, if by itself would not be acceptable, it would be separate from the village, and this is an application which relies, with the two elements of it relying on itself. As planning officers, we're not naive that people sometimes use these as Trojan horses to get what they want. But in terms of submitting a business plan and in terms of the suite of conditions proposed for this, it's intended to try and tie this development up to be implemented as it's presented. We can't second guess things, but effectively the conditions basically tie the house to the glamping and the glamping to the house.
I'm sorry, Chat, that my computer cut out. Would the officer mind just repeating that from the beginning? The computer's just literally died, so I've joined on my iPad.
I don't know if I can, but if I miss anything, I'm sure someone will point it out. I mean, yes, I agree that the house by itself would not be acceptable. in terms of its relationship to the village. And that as planning officers, we're not naive in that sometimes people submit planning applications in a way to make the planning system look favourably on them. So there's a little bit of a catch-22 here in that the house by itself wouldn't be acceptable, but it is when associated with the glamping in terms of its relationship to the village. Some of the locals think the glamping is inappropriate on the edge of the village. So you've got a site here on the edge of the countryside, which is in different degrees, if looked at individually, appropriate for each of the uses. It's only when the two uses are combined that we've come to the conclusion that this is acceptable, which is why they're tied so heavily together through the proposed conditions list, both in terms of their implementation and occupation. It is a site that the strategic housing land availability assessment did look at for housing, and I don't think housing over the entire site would be acceptable. That would be too much. The recommendation for approval is basically that the two elements work well with each other on the edge of the settlement, but individually they might not be acceptable. The glamping might sit there happily by itself, but not the house. I'm sorry if I'm floundering around a bit, but I can see why the councillor and indeed some of the local residents are concerned that this might be a little bit of a Trojan horse, but ultimately we have to consider this as proposed. The county plan does require that this is done formally in terms of the amount of information that supports this to show that it is a viable concern, and the conditions list proposed does seek to ensure that this is implemented and operated exactly as presented and not in part.
Thanks very much, Steve. Steve, would you just like to clarify the situation if this application was to go ahead, but the glamping side of it wasn't successful? What would be the situation in terms of the dwelling?
That is something we would just have to assess as and when we came to it. If it was done in a way where it had been obviously manipulated and there had been no reasonable attempt at the glamping, then we have an element of control. But effectively, that falls under the remit of a different proposal, because the conditions are so tight in trying to link this together. Effectively, it would require. We'd have to assess it at the time. I can see what the concern is, but I don't think it's within my remit in the current decision-making process.
That's fine. Thanks very much for that. I just want to go over to Councillor Boyd here. Councillor Boyd, is this a point of clarification?
No, it wasn't, Chair, so I'll wait later.
That's fine. Thanks very much. Councillor Shields, is this a point of clarification? You're on mute.
No, it's not a point of clarification. Just wanted to make a quick question.
Thanks very much. Can we move on then? And we now have a speaker in support, and it's Steve Clement. So, Steve, could I ask you to give your presentation again? As in the former cases, I'll remind you, you have 5 minutes, and you will get a warning after 4 minutes to say that you have 1 minute left. Thanks very much, and it's over to you, Mr. Clement. Are you there, Mr. Clement?
Hello.
Hello. Is that
Hello,
Mr. Clement?
Yeah.
Could you give your presentation now, Mr. Clement? You've got 5 minutes, and you'll get a warning after 4 minutes. Thanks very much.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee and the interested parties. We have been asked by our client to lead what is a very exciting project for them as they plan their retirement strategy around their forever home. Our client and his family have no plan to rest easy, and they have resisted the path of least resistance, which would have been to sell the land to a private home developer, of which there are plenty of avenues. Instead, they have seen this land as an opportunity to give back to the local economy by bringing outside customers from across the country, thus increasing the local economic impact over the many years ahead. All this whilst enjoying a home that they have taken time and care to design that suits their own living needs and the needs of the business that sustains it. Although the business viability has been questioned throughout the planning process, we now have a business plan that shows that this passion project can not only be sustained, but it can prosper. Coupled with the support that has been offered from Visit County Durham, who state that it is consistent with their market intelligence, we see no reason why this business cannot prosper and in turn provide an uplift to the surrounding local businesses. One of the key causes of concern by interested parties is the possible nuisance from the site and potential risk from strangers. As this notion, I would remind everyone involved that our client is taking residence only 100 yards away, and they certainly do not have the benefit of a well-lit main road to protect them from this slim possibility. It is therefore in our client's best interest to uphold the management process outlined in our management plan for the protection of themselves and their new neighbours. The school has raised legitimate concerns in relation to safeguarding children and avoiding the possibility of their studies being hindered, concerns that we understand and have tried to nullify by design as much as possible. We have reduced the quantity to 8 pods. The pods that remain are situated opposite the field to avoid the classroom being impacted. To reduce any impact even further, we have added a heavily planted buffer between the school and the glamping site, along with 2 separate fence lines. It is also worth considering the occupation of the site during the window of 9 AM to 3 PM on a weekday. The proposed occupants will be visiting the local area or embarking on scenic bike rides during these hours. By no means will any noise-creating activities be allowed during this period, particularly with the 24-hour management offered by the adjoining house. As far as weekend activities go, the site will not be open to group bookings and there will be curfews applied at risk of removal from the management. The design strategy of the self-contained pod was also considered as consideration for the local community. Rather than a communal toilet or shower facility, which is commonplace in a glamping setting, we have restricted the potential movement in unsavoury hours by allowing a self-contained unit. So on to the appearance and functionality of the proposal. The form of the building lends itself to a passive house style with simple junctions, meaning less chance of air loss. Its placement over 2 metres into the ground is strategic and allows coverage of the lower part of the building from Stone Row. What will be seen from Stone Row through the trees and the bund is a single-storey contemporary design at worst. At best, and in the height of summer, there will be little to no visibility of the site from Stone Row. The only location where this house can be seen in context with the local buildings is from the field on the western boundary, a location that is rarely accessed. Although traffic has been raised numerous times from objectors, it has caused no concern from the Highway Department. In our experience, a newly formed junction visible on the approach from Twizzle Lane will actually slow drivers down as they anticipate a possible turn into or out of their flow of traffic. This could be seen as a traffic calming measure by proxy. One of the key elements of the build and something that our client is passionate about is sustainability and passive house designs, both of which are implemented into the design strategy to leave a self-sustained home which relieves the local infrastructure as much as possible.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, thank you. Coupled with the addition of the understated wind turbine and solar panels, this proposal seeks to not only provide its own energy, but have some to spare to store in lesser months or give back to the grid. It is our view, in an architectural capacity, that this notion should be promoted and supported as much as possible, whilst also considering the local planning. We feel that over the course of this application, both of these statements have been fully considered and implemented. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clements. Are there any points that members wish to raise for clarification rather than to enter into discussion? Could I sort of just ask, and maybe you can answer this, or Dave can answer this, Steve. I'm wondering, Councillor Wood did talk about a drainage issue and also a traffic issue. Can we clarify what the impact would be here? Why I ask this is we're talking about normally having one central shower block and a glamping site, but what we seem to have on this is a number of individual sort of bathrooms. What effect is that going to have? Is the drainage requirements going to improve the current situation or make it worse?
Thank you, Chair. This is a layman's appreciation of this. I mean, to a degree, the water on the site will be managed, both the foul and the surface water. Ultimately, I know the applicant has been in discussion with Northumbrian Water, and our own consultee only effectively responded in principle about what's proposed. I think it is critical that obviously, you know, there's some management of the water going on here, and effectively the larger part of the site will remain open for percolation, and the bottom half of the site in its entirety will remain open for that. So what drainage said was the type of scheme that had been suggested was something they'd be likely to support in principle, but that the council does have control over this issue through the building regulation process in terms of the technical detail of it. Obviously beyond our remit, but within the council's wider control, or within the building regulation process's wider control, where the building regulation processes are available. So as far as I can see, and as far as I've been able to establish, the drainage issues have been controlled, but they fall under the formal control of the planning process, notwithstanding there is a catch-all condition at the end of the condition list to try and address this. If I could hand over to Dave for the highways issues, please.
Hello, councillors. Holiday customers generated the traffic generation by these proposals. In terms of the trips associated with holiday customers are generally out of peak times, and I would envisage that, you know, they come down the A1M up the A693 through Greens Bank, the unclassified road, through the village where there's like a Splinter Island junction there, and then down to the Newbridge Banks. That route from the primary route from the A693 is a streetlit area, and there's footways. There's nothing that stands out in terms of highway safety issues for pedestrians, and obviously, you know, the trips will be out when obviously the likelihood is children's going to school in the morning and PM peaks. You know, probably the morning PM peak. As I say, I don't see any issue with pedestrians on that route. And in terms of the access junction, that's been designed to DMRB standards, so good visibility in both directions, and that's been clearly plotted by the applicant on a site access plan. I don't see any issue with that road junction operating safely at that location.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Dave. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to committee for discussion, and I'm going to the list that I've got here already. I've got Councillor Boyd.
Hi, I think kind of like the last issue, I'm really conflicted here because, you know, there's points in favour and points against. The points against for me is I've got sympathies with the views of the school, although I recognise that the applicant is trying to mitigate against them. I actually, and this is me personally, really dislike the house and don't think that fits in with the local area at all, but I know that's a value judgment on my part. On the other hand, you know, we have an area that hopefully when things get back to normal, the Beamish, Tanfield Railway, etc., we're looking forward to Tanfield Railway having its 100-year centenary soon. We need to be building up tourism in that area, so the glamping pods would be welcome. So at this moment in time, I'm interested in hearing how the debate goes, because I am very conflicted. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Boyd. And can I hand over to Councillor Shield, please?
Thank you, Chair. The local member makes some very relevant comments. This development is outside the courtesy of the village. If it was a house, it probably wouldn't get approval. If it was a development, it probably wouldn't get approval. But it might get approval if we allow the pods. I have a question. What would come first? Would it be the house and then the pods? Or would it be the pods and then the house? And if it was the pods first, who would macro manage the management plan, or whether there's Section 39? I think there's significant safeguarding concerns that need to be clarified And whilst we're back to mitigation levels again, I do appreciate the benefits of this one, but I would want some surety, because it states that it's not the local planning authority to macromanage the operation. I've had personal experience, as we probably all have, of people not complying with conditions. And the last thing I want to have is an issue where this condition of macro management is not complied with. And I'd like to see some further relevant explanation of this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shield. Is there any officer want to come back on this one?
Certainly, Chair, I can. I mean, in terms of the timing of this, the conditions list tries to tie the two parts of the development together and knit them to make them as interdependent as they're presented. Therefore, condition 5 of the report says the dwelling hereby approved must not be occupied until the glamping element of the proposal, consisting of all the pods, the access roads, the circulation, and the rest of it, has been confirmed in writing as complete. What we didn't want to do was to have this development where, you know, the glamping was sort of ready just out of season, and that prevented the occupation of the house. So there's I think a reasonable threshold to try and tie the two elements of the development there together. There's also a condition that's fairly standard on development in the countryside and often agricultural approvals, that the occupation of the development has to be limited to somebody solely or mainly or last working in the management of the unit. Now, we're very careful about conditions, and Durham County Council is I think in the forefront in terms of being proactive in trying to manage rather than just react to the control of planning conditions, which is why we have our monitoring teams in all the planning teams. The elements about macro managing is that my point during the presentation, that certain elements of the management plan as put in by the applicant go beyond the remit of the planning process. And we don't want arguments where enforcement officers are having to check whether somebody would be prepared to put in their criminal record or the like is not really something for us to macro manage for that. There are significant elements of the management plan in terms of the hours of use, the use of lighting, and the control of the specifics, which we are. So we do want a condition that gives us full control over those elements of the site's operation that are appropriate, but we don't effectively want to accidentally become the managers of this by default in terms of the minutiae of it. A strong planning permission in terms of those elements of the management plan relevant to the planning control will be both agreed and imposed. And that's something discussions with Mr. Clements on the architect's behalf has agreed to in terms of clarifying exactly what elements are appropriate. There will be strong control over this, but there won't be over control over this, is what we're trying to get at.
Thanks very much for that, Steve. Are you okay with that, Councillor Boyd and Councillor Shield?
Yeah, thank you for the clarification on that.
Thanks very much. That's lovely. Okay, can I now pass over to Councillor Bell, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Overall, I think it's absolutely brilliant scheme, and I think it's a credit to Steve for the application to get it where he's getting it to, and overcoming a lot of the concerns from when it first came into the office in March. I absolutely think it's brilliant. But at the same time, I do, in relation to the local members' concerns, and particularly next door to the school, as regarding the safeguarding. And I'll come back onto that one just regarding the conditions, but as regarding the site location, I mean, I'm not too sure if regarding what Steve said, if regarding the housing and would it be next door to the school, but the way I read the Durham plan now is regarding it being in a sustainable location. And I would have thought, like, you know, it's probably, you know, I would have thought it would be quite straightforward to get normal housing on there, with it being the location that it's in. But anyhow, that's another discussion, I guess. Just touching on what Lynn also said there in regard to supporting the local economy in relation to Beamish, the Tanfield Railway, the golf course, which is over the road. it just brings in a lot of, you know, like a lot of support into the local economy. However, to move it on in relation to clarify my support, what I would like to see in there is a little bit tightening in with the conditions. And I respect what Steve says there, not to, you know, to overdo it in regard to the conditions, but I think there's a couple of things which comes up on such sites. Is one is like the use of fire pits, like obviously being next door to the school. If it like sort of in relation to the house rules, the conditions which the site will give out to users who come and stay on there. You always have a time frame when they can and can't be used, i.e. outside of school hours. The CCTV that was already mentioned, and I don't know, maybe is regarding the county council having sight of the housekeeping rules, which people in relation to noise or disturbances which could happen, and you know, let the planning officer have sight of these rules in relation to having some say in there. Thank you very much for that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. I kind of think that sort of Steve probably answered part of that question in his previous, where he talked about the council wouldn't want to get involved in the micromanagement of the situation, and I think that maybe some of it would be generating that type of situation. I don't know whether you want to come in further, Steve, or if you're happy just to let go what you've already said.
I think I covered a lot of it, and it's the balance. There are elements of the plan that the management plan that tried to preclude these disposable barbecues being brought onto site and the use of that. I don't know if it's maybe useful for Mark Anslow to have a quick comment on this in terms of the likely relationship between the use of this and the adjacent dwellings. If I could offer Mark that, perhaps.
Are you there, Mark? Hello, Mark?
Chair Mark Anslow's left the meeting.
Thanks very much for that. Sorry, we can't get Mark.
Sorry, I assumed he'd stayed on. He did comment on this, and both the reduction in the number of units and I think the management plan has addressed some of the issues that were relevant to his advice that were raised by residents, subject to this appropriate level of control.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Steve. Can I move on now then, and Councillor Tucker, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, given the small number of glamping pods proposed, what the financial sustainability long term of this proposal is going to be, because we've already heard from officers and the local member that one without the other would not pass the planning test. So I'm wondering if shortly down the line we're going to end up with a house on its own and no business, and what the viability then would be, and what would be the planning implications of that. Could I just get some clarity on that from Steve, please?
Yeah. Well, I think I did bring that up earlier, but anyway, I think if you look in the report, we have had Business Durham who have been working with this particular developer, but I'll invite Steve to come in and if he has something to say.
Just a brief point. The sort of the Chesley Street to Stanley Beamish corridor is something that we're getting a lot of interest, in particular for these types of units, for glamping businesses, both in terms of actual applications and inquiries, probably more so than any other area in the remit of the Northern Area Planning Team. And all I'd say is I think one of the attractions to people for setting these things up is they're fairly low, or comparatively low, in terms of setup costs to a lot of holiday accommodation, in terms of building bespoke structures and the like. The pods themselves are quite characterful, but I think they almost come on as kit build. It is a low cost start entry into this sort of leisure operation or leisure provision. And I think that has to be borne in mind in terms of the viability of it. So what the future holds, none of us know at the moment. There's a believable looking business plan being put in there, but I think a component of that is the low startup costs on this, which will help the potential viability of this.
Okay, Councillor Tucker, are you happy with that?
Not entirely happy, Chair, but thank you for the response.
Okay, thanks very much. Can we move on now to Councillor Milburn? You're on mute, Councillor Milburn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can take my request off. It was answered by something that Steve said just before there. Thank you.
That's fine. Thanks very much, Councillor Milburn. And I think we've got Councillor Bainbridge here.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's concerning me that the drainage system that these pods are going to be used, are we aware of it? Because it seemed very, Steve wasn't quite sure whether it was involved, or do we have to inform the building regulations? And are they aware that the drainage system can be used by the pods?
A detailed drainage plan has been submitted, which is beyond my technical knowledge. Like I say, we've got a comment in principle by our drainage officers, but they did point out that we have control over this through the building control process.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Bainbridge?
Yes, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for that.
That's fine. Thanks very much. Does there any more questions? I'm not seeing any more in the chat function, so I think what we need to do now is we need to move straight to the vote. We obviously would need a proposer and a seconder for whatever we feel is appropriate. We've got the application in front of us. Can we have a proposer and seconder, please? Councillor Bell.
Yes, I'm happy to move the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Do we have a seconder for that?
Quite happy to second that, Councillor Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Milburn. And so can we move straight to the vote? We've got a proposer and seconder in favour of this application. Neil, can you take over now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just before we put it to the vote, I'll just clarify what the planning officer said in terms of amendments. So he did mention amendments to conditions 4 and 9. So that's the requirement to submit a management plan rather than relying on the details that have already been submitted. So there'll be some further information comes forward through that condition, and also the requirement for a biodiversity management plan and works on the site, including long-term maintenance for 30 years. That will need to be secured by a Section 39 agreement rather than by condition. So subject to those amendments, we'll put it to the vote in accordance with the officer's recommendation. So the first person I'll come to is Councillor Bainbridge. Can you say whether you're for or against that, please?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Boyd.
For.
Councillor Higgins.
For.
Sorry, I've missed Councillor Boyd out. Sorry about that.
How can you miss me out? I'm for.
Okay, and Councillor Higgins, I think you said you were for as well, didn't you?
Yes, I'm for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milburn.
For.
Okay, Councillor Martin.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Shield.
A reluctant for.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
For.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Tucker.
Sorry, Chair. I'm abstaining.
Okay, thank you. Chair, that's 10 votes in favour and 1 abstention.
Thanks very much for that, Neil. Can I say that the application for the land to the south of West Pelton Primary School has been successful, and so it will go ahead. What we've got now is to move to such other business as, in the opinion of the chair of the meeting, is of sufficient urgency to warrant consideration. I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear that I don't have anything that falls into that category. It's been quite a long meeting, this. It's quite a long time to sit in front of a computer screen. So I thank you for your attendance. I thank you for your cooperation and also your comments. Can I say a huge thank you to everyone concerned, to our officers and to members, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much. Remember that if we stay on for a few seconds while we close the live streaming down. Thanks very much. Bye.